Good morning. My name is Kyle Houchins. I'm a technical trainer for McNeil, and this is Getting Started Rhino for Windows. Today, we're going to take a look at this scruffy little sketch I put together, and of this glue gun model that I saw something similar online. I thought it was cool, and so I did my own version of it. And I want to talk a little bit about how this is put together before we get rolling. And the idea here is we're essentially doing a Y branch shape, right? And these are, there's a Y branch here and there's a Y branch here. Um, and these are typically difficult shapes to model. And what we're going to talk about today is a strategy on how to do a form like this that essentially helps eliminate the Y branch, in the fact that if we were to look at this shape in perspective, it basically is going to be made up of a surface that looks like this, basically. It's going to come up over like that, and it's going to go through here like that. Um, and then what we're going to do is actually trim out this shape like that, and then add the blends in this area. So basically we're going to have this shape like this, and this shape is going to roll over like this, and we're going to trim this out. And this is all going to be one continuous shape through here, right? And then what we're going to do is look at how we essentially connect all of these areas in order to flesh out the form. And this is an effective way of doing these kind of shapes, and it gets you away from having to build this form and then build this form and then figure out how to blend all this stuff together. Because this right here is a very common continuity trap, where your highlights will essentially track beautifully down here, and then they'll hit your blend, and they'll either jump or they'll dip or they'll do something through here that gives away the fact that there's essentially a giant blend through here. And you can do it, right? It can be done. There's a million examples of this being done out there. But it's much more difficult than if we use the idea that I'm going to be working off of here. And again, if you've seen any of my other videos, you probably have seen that, I make these up on the fly. I don't rehearse them. I don't practice them before. And the reason I don't do that is because I want to make sure that I'm putting myself in the same position that you are if a client or a boss or somebody walks into your office and drops a sketch on your desk and says, build this. So I want to actually put myself in the same position where I have to do the same level of thinking that you do, and try and kind of find the way along the way. And so we can look at this thing and break it down into a couple of pieces. One, very clearly revolved part, right? This is just very simply a revolved surface, no problem. This is just, a bent piece of wire that's piped. That's no problem. The body, we talked a little bit about the body. I think that's not going to be much of a big deal. And then we've got some blending and some stuff to do in this area, and we'll have to take a couple of different roads along that journey to try and figure out exactly how all that's going to get together. But with that in mind, kind of that idea behind this thing, I'm going to start the same way I always do. I import an image. I use the picture command to put this in, and I'll just redo it. So bring the picture command up, grab this, place it in the scene, drag it to where you want it. I'm going to place it vaguely over the origin, and I'm going to assign this to a layer. I'm going to name the layer just so I know what it is by double clicking. And then I'm going to go to the materials tab, and you'll notice that with this picked, you'll see that there's actually a material called glue gun, which is the name of the file. And we're going to come down here and crank up the object transparency a little bit to dim the image so that we can draw over it, and also so you can't see how terrible my line work is on that sketch that I puked out about 20 minutes before we started this webinar. So usually I move the screen around a lot so you can't see how terrible the screen is, but I had to leave it sitting still so that we could talk about it. And so we'll dim it so it's not quite as horrific and also easier to model over. And then what we'll do, the last thing we're going to do is we're just going to lock this. And then that way we can work over this without modifying it. Actually, one more thing I'm going to do, I'm actually going to go to the perspective view, unlock this, and using Gumball, I'm going to slide it out of essentially the modeling envelope here, because what I don't want is this, which is the model is, you know, bisecting the image, because specifically in shaded view, you get that, and it's very difficult to work with. So if I take this and I slide it back in space, I can still see what's going on, but if I go to front view, especially in wireframe, I can see what I'm doing and work off of it. So that's why I always slide it back in space and get it out of the way. So let's go ahead and lock that now so it's locked down. And then we're just going to start looking at what we're going to do. And we're going to identify a few kind of major curves. And the first curve that we're going to identify is probably this one here. And I'm going to just start with a straight line. I'm going to change degree from 1 to 3. And what that does is that gives me 4 points that are very nicely, evenly spaced. And so I'm going to turn those on, points on. And let's just take these and we're just going to pull them up and bend them to get the shape that we wanted, right? And because this is a symmetrical object, I'm going to build what's called a proxy object, and I'm just going to drag a straight line back in space. And what this is going to do is this is going to allow me to be able to set whatever curves I build off of this tangent at the center line, which means I'm not going to have a peak, or I'm not going to have a, you know, like a butt chin at the center line. So that allows me to be able to, you know, work off of this and not have it, you know, not have it be weird at the center line. So this is a common technique if you're building symmetrical objects, especially if you're building vehicles or anything like that that have to be tangent. That's a good way to go. So let's go to the front view, and I'm just going to pull again. I'm going to pull a straight line kind of in this direction, and then I'm going to pull a straight line in this direction. We'll go back to the perspective view. I'm going to change degree on both of these again to 3. Again, that's going to give me 4 really nicely evenly spaced points. And I'm going to grab these guys, and actually let's just do this. Let's use the match command, and we're just going to match this curve to this curve, and we're going to match it tangent. And we'll just let it do its thing. We're not going to join it, we're not going to average it, and we're going to let it go like that. And you can see that because we've got this straight line, right, if I turn the points on for this surface, you can see that these points are in line. This is the G0 point, this is the G1, this is the G1 here. These are all in a line, which means this is tangent. So that means if I were to mirror this curve later, right, like that, it's going to be tangent at this point, because all of these points, all of these 3 points are lined up, right? So that's why we use this proxy surface. If we know we're going to be building something symmetrical to start with, I like to do it this way. So let's match again back here. And what this has also done is you can see that this has given us this nice little kind of OG curve going on here, right? We've got this little S shape. And if I leave this point alone, I can do whatever I want to these points down here and not screw up my tangency. So that's kind of one of the nice ways of getting this set up. And then if I do want to mess with these points, I just use the gumball and I can go this way or this way and determine how much, shape gets thrown on this surface or on this curve, and I maintain my tangency. As long as these 3 points are in line, that's tangent. So you're going to have a nice clean center line when you switch over. So I'm just going to mess with these a little bit, and then I'm going to do a one rail sweep, and I'm just going to run that, and I'll pick it out of here instead of my middle mouse button menu. By the way, if you want to build your own middle mouse button menu, easy for you to say, middle mouse button click, grab the gray bar and wiggle it, and it'll dock. And then what you can do is come over here and hold down the control key, not the shift key. If you hold down shift, see how it says move edit? If I move this out of here, it's actually going to remove it from this toolbar, which I don't want to do. So I'm going to copy it, and I'm just going to drag it over here and let it go. And that allows me to be able to put it in there. Now, if I want to remove something from here, because this is a copy, I can do this. Now I can hold down shift, pull it out, and it just deletes out of that. Once you get it set up the way that you want it, then you can close it. And then when you hit the middle mouse button, it pops up, you pick something and it goes away. That I use this all the time, and I apologize in the video if I revert back to my standard modeling habits of using the middle mouse button. I'll try to remember to pick from the menu so that you can see what is going on here, and we will continue to try and work like that. So let's look at the one rail sweep. I'm going to use this edge of the surface as the sweep, and then as the rail, and then I'm going to use this as the shapes. And we're just going to let it go, and I'm gonna just let it do its thing. I'm going to say okay, and this gives me a very nice, very even surface, right? Got not a ton of points. I don't love the fact that it's got so many spans, so let's do it the other direction with a 2 rail sweep, and we're going to just do it off the surface edge. And that's also got a ton of spans that I don't want in there. So let's do this instead. Let's go, and the reason I don't want that many spans is because I'm going to do some editing on this surface, so I want to keep the surface as light as possible. So let's just connect these. I'm going to change degree here and turn the points on, and I'm going to just go in the front view. And it's not super critical, but I want to follow kind of like the basic shape up here. I'm not going to get nuts about it, but that's kind of what I'm looking for. And I may actually add just a tiny little bit of crown here, just because flat surfaces tend to look hollow. And then I'm going to use this 4-sided surface tool, which makes really nice single span surfaces, right? And that gives me a much lighter, if I turn the points on for this, a much lighter surface. See how that just has the minimum number of points it needs. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to match surf just to set this now so I don't have to worry about it later. And I'm going to match this, and I'm not going to refine it, but I'm going to match it tangent, and I'm not going to average the surfaces, and let it go. And now I can essentially get rid of this because it's done its job. And if I mirror the surface, I've got a nice tangent match at the center line, and I can see that because these points are all lined up. Now, if one of these was all jacked up and came up here like this, you could see from the control polygon of the CV cage that this point, and this point are not lined up, so obviously it's not tangent. So I'm going to put it back where it lives, and that's going to give us the basis of what we're going to do with this thing. Now, we're going to assume that these points right now are dead to us. We're not going to touch them. We're not going to look at them. We're not going to acknowledge their presence. We're not going to do anything other than just leave them alone, and with the exception of we could scale them closer or farther apart. That's all we would ever do to these things. But for right now, we're just going to kind of leave them alone, and we're going to focus on these points down here to decide what's happening with the rest of this model. And we could take a look at this and say, okay, well, the form on this shows it rolls over the top, and then I can see a little bit of shading, so it's kind of rolling under the center, which means that I probably want my OG to happen kind of in that area. So I'm going to grab these points, and it really doesn't matter. I'm going to get rid of one side of it because there's no reason for me to work on both sides of this thing at the same time. And I'm going to just go to shaded mode, and I'm going to just use my C-plane waffle and see how that highlight's moving. You see this right here? See this band of highlight right here? As I move that, look what happens. I can move that up or down, and on this particular form, it probably is pretty high. So I'm actually going to tuck this way up there. I'm going to pull it back a little bit like that. So my highlight is tracking kind of in the right place now, right? See that? How high that is? And what I can do is cell last, and then I can adjust what that shape looks like. Double click on the dotted line between the two to select a row. It's a nice new 7 feature. And I'm going to pull this out a little bit. And then what I don't want is I don't want this to cross. And so maybe what I'm going to do is pull it down a little bit. See how they're kind of right on top of each other? I don't really want that. So I'm going to pull this down just a little bit like that. And then maybe what I'll do is I'll actually pull this row directly in and end up something like that. And that's going to kind of give me about what I'm looking for. Now I could always add another row if I needed to, but I really don't think I'm going to need to, and I'm going to just rotate these just a tiny bit like that. And then let's shade it and see what it looks like. And I think I'm kind of okay with that. I think the highlight's kind of breaking where I want it to break, and then it's tucking in where I want it to tuck. And I may want it to tuck in just a little bit farther, so let's add another row. So we're going to go control points, and we're going to say insert knot. And we're going to pick, and we're just going to pull a knot up here, and you can see that it adds another row of control points. So I can pull this up, and then I can start to determine like what is going on with this form. Let's go a little higher. And see how it's starting to tuck under? That's kind of what I'm looking for. I kind of want the handle to be fairly parallel to each other, like that, fairly vertical. I don't really want it to flare out too much at the base, but I do want to have that kind of roll, and maybe I'll pull these guys back out a little bit now. Everybody's going, yeah, he really doesn't rehearse these. Nope. We're figuring it out along the way. So the one thing that I do want to point out is just because you built a surface doesn't mean you can't go back and mess with it, right? And this whole idea of being able to grab points and pulling on them is a really important thing to realize, because this is where the real power of NURBS starts to kind of come together, where you can say, well, it's close, but I really want to shape more like that. And you can really start to kind of bend and define these highlights to do what you want to do. And it puts you in this position where you're no longer limited by what the computer will give you. Now you start being able to determine, well, what do I want it to do? What shapes do I want to try and make happen? Just because the surface doesn't do it doesn't mean I can't have it, right? You have to have enough skill to be able to get into the points and start moving this around. Now, even though we've messed around with this, if I mirror it, say I mirror it correctly this time, I still get tangency across the center line because these 3 points, 1, 2, 3, are lined up. And if you're just getting started with Rhino and you don't understand, the whole tangency continuity, all that kind of stuff, don't really sweat it. You don't need to really go crazy trying to understand it at this point. And I'm actually going to modify the shape of this thing just a little bit by pulling these points in just a little bit. And this is going to give me a little bit softer shape like that. And it's kind of about the proportion I wanted for the top end of this thing. And believe it or not, we're really pretty far down the road here with this model already, because this surface is going to give us a lot of what we need. And I'm going to move these guys in just a little bit to thin the handle up just a little bit. And because I used history when I copied this over, you can see that when I change one side, it changes the other side as well, which is nice. And maybe that's too skinny now. This is one of the things that I love about working in 3D is you can actually design in 3D as opposed to just being a CAD monkey. No disrespect to monkeys, but what I don't want you to do is to be somebody who just traces drawings, right? What I want you to do is I want you to look at this stuff in 3 dimensions. I want you to evaluate this and say, okay, does this make sense? Did I screw up? Did I screw up my model by looping these things on top of each other, which I did. So let's fix that. Let's do this. And let's put this back at 0. I'm going to snap my gumball here. And then I'm going to snap it to the center, and then we'll mirror again. See, I look dumb, so you don't have to. All right, so then we're going to evaluate this and say, okay, does this feel right? Is it too fat? Is it too thin? Is it, too something? And in this case, I think the handle is probably still just a hair too fat. So I'm going to bring it in just a hair. And because I worked with history, it'll update the other side. And I'm going to say that probably, to my eye, probably feels okay, right? And by the way, these are supposed to be interactive sessions. So if you see something on here and you want to hit the chat and ask a question, please don't hesitate to interrupt. This is kind of more of a conversation between me and you as opposed to I'm standing in front giving a class. So if you see something or you have a question or you have a comment, go ahead and hit the chat. That's not a problem whatsoever. I'll be more than happy to stop and answer questions and go from there. All right, so let's look at this shape a little bit. Maybe this needs to come up more like that so that this line kind of flows through here. Maybe this one needs to come up a little bit farther like that. Right, so that line kind of follows, and that line kind of follows, and that line kind of does what it needs. And then we'll just agree that that's probably pretty darn close, right? So then let's come through here and let's figure out what's going to happen next. And there's a little bit of crown on the back of this thing, which I'm not catching, so I'm actually going to turn these points on again. I'm going to pull these out far enough so that I'm going to overbuild this a little bit and then trim it back. So I just want to make sure that that surface is long enough to do what we need to do later. And I'm going to pull this down just a hair like that. All right, so now I've got enough surface here that I can hack off and trim it back. But there's two major trims that need to happen. There's this one that follows this line all the way out, right? And then there's the same one in the back, which essentially gives us this little strip of the center of the handle, which is going to provide the continuity of the blend between the upper body and the lower body. So let's just go ahead and draw those out. And I'm going to just draw these simply. And we're going to use rule of 3 for the corners, right? Only 3 points for the corner, not more, not less. And we're going to come out here. If you haven't seen my rule of 3 video, Google that take a look at it. And then we're gonna do the same thing down here. We're gonna come out here like this, 3 points for a corner. Pull this one in. Come out like that. And then in order to get this to finish off, I need to enclose this somehow. So I'm gonna just go and I'm gonna trim this. If I trim it here, if I make a blend, the blend is gonna actually happen in this space, right? Because this will be the start. It has to go out, swing around, and attach to the other side. So I actually need to trim back farther in order to give myself room to blend. So I actually need to trim back like here, right? Because this little chunk in the front is going to be a blend. And in fact, I could even go so far as to just, you know, take this entire thing off. And maybe that's actually the way to do it now that I'm thinking about it. Let's do that instead. So let's just pull this straight out the bottom. And then let's just get rid of this point and that point, and maybe that one as well. That way we just come right out the bottom like that. And let's make that trim first. So let's grab these two and let's just trim it. And then hide some curves. And this is what we're kind of left with, right? And if we look at this, you can see that a lot of our work is already done. This blend here is already happening nicely, so we don't have to worry about that. The highlight tracks right through that spot really nicely. And we could essentially, you know, if we wanted to hack this, let's say it's 4:45 on a Friday and we really want to get out of here, we could just do essentially, you know, that and be most of the way home, right? We could mess with this. Now this is a horrifically ugly surface and we probably don't want to do that, but you could essentially just blend that, and then if you really wanted to lie, cheat, or steal, shut your properties off here, you know, shut off your ISO curves and, you know, whee, now it looks great, right? It doesn't, you know, you can hide a lot of lies. You can hide a lot of horror by just shutting off the surface ISO curves if you wanna make yourself look fantastic. But this is probably not great. The surface is crossing and all that. So let's not do that. But that essentially is what we're going to be heading towards, right? Is that concept of connecting these two things together. And so let's look at that. And first of all, let's hack off the bottom here so that we can get that done. And I'm going to just do a 4-point curve. And I'm going to trim this, but I'm not going to delete this curve because at some point I'm probably going to want to make that curve again. And let's assemble our blends here, and let's get this thing put together. And the probably what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to blend right off the back of this thing. And you could see before that when I ran the blend surface tool, which lives here, by the way, here, blend surface. If I just blend these and let it rip, right, and I'm going to get rid of the interior shapes, you can see that it makes a fairly complex surface, and it's set to curvature right now, which I don't necessarily need. So I'm going to just grab some sliders and I'm going to start messing with this. And if I go to my front view, you can see that I can get pretty, at least in the vague neighborhood of what I need to do with this surface. Now, does this give me exactly what I want? No, and the reason for that is because there is a lot of, you know, there's a mess here, right? And this is also a poly surface. So let's break it down into its individual pieces and let's hide these. Or we can go the other route and we can use a blend curve, which lives under here, blend curve, and let's blend this edge and this edge. And let's flip both of those. and we want them both to be tangent. And let's shift drag the points a little bit and say okay, and then let's run a 2-rail sweep. Sorry, I keep going to my pop-ups. And let's just 2-rail sweep this and see that if we can get one single surface. And in this case, it's probably going to give us a single surface, and now we've got points to mess with. And it's a lot of points, right? And maybe we can work with this, maybe we can't. Maybe what we want to do is we want to rebuild this, and instead of having 42 points in that direction, maybe we want to have 20. And let's see what that looks like. And it's better, right? That's a little bit better. Let's leave this at 4. Maybe we even go less. Maybe we say 15. And you're saying to yourself, wait a minute, that seems insane, because now very clearly this surface does not join with this surface anymore. Well, so what? There's a gap here, there's a step, there's a material break here anyways that we have an opportunity to be able to blend over anyways, so who cares? Let's fix what's here, and let's make this surface do what we want it to do, and then we'll worry about how it connects back with the rest of the model later. So let's grab these guys, and I'm just going to pull these over like that, and I'm going to pull these over. This is one of the things that when very often when you're taught NURBS modeling, right, you don't spend a lot of time talking about, well, how do I make the surface do what I want if it's not doing what I want? Well, this is how. You get in and you just start beating on it. And as long as we're moving, in XYZ, then it's fairly easy to sculpt this stuff, as long as we're not getting in a huge mess with a million points in a surface. Now, this is what I would like to refer to as a gigantic mess. So let's grab these points. Let's come over here and use a tool. I just did a video on this, by the way, on Move UVN. And let's just smooth these guys in the U. And you can see that it unties that rat's nest. And once it unties it, then we can come in and very kind of grossly just drag this stuff where we want it to be. And all of a sudden, our shape starts to emerge. And we don't have to sweat it too much, right? We don't have to get too crazy about it and sweat this too much and worry about whether or not the shape is correct or incorrect or whatever, because we always have the option of coming back into the points and messing with it, right? So we're going to come in here and mess with it. We're going to get it about where we want it to be. And then we will grab these individual points in here, like maybe these guys. See how this, can you see this step? See how it rises and then it dips and then it comes back up? That's kind of a discontinuity. So what I want to do is I'm going to grab that series of points, and I'm just going to smooth them in the U. And you'll see that they all kind of, see how that just kind of straightens out and gets better? So that gives us kind of what we need as far as being able to build that. And then maybe what we even do is grab these G0 points, and maybe we pull those a little farther than we need them to be, so that we can trim them off later. We're going to overbuild this. And we don't have to get crazy with this. We can just make sure that it overlaps-ish. Right? If we're going to commit to that, we might as well commit to it. So let's just pull it so it's all the way over. And we have intentionally created this discontinuity. And if we look at that, you can see what's happened here is we have the shape. We have a very nice blend, right? The highlights are tracking on it really nicely. But there's no way in the world that these two surfaces are going to join together. And so I guess I just say, okay, who cares? So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go into side view, go into wireframe, and I'm going to trim, and I'm going to type CRV enter. And this is what's called the curve switch. And actually, it's not going to work because this is sticking off the end. So let's fix that. And we've overbuilt this anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But I'm going to just grab this and pull it back so that this edge completes and makes a complete. I can trim this whole thing off, right? So that's kind of what I want. And I'm going to lie a little bit about this down here. Maybe we'll trim this off a little bit later, or maybe we'll just scale it or do something, whatever, but it doesn't matter. Don't worry about stuff so much. You worry about too much stuff. So trim, CRV, click, that's the surface edge. That's the input. So what we've done is we've taken a surface edge and we've turned it into a trim object. And then we're going to accept that, and then I'm just going to trim this off. And you can see that the gap that's left, maybe the simplest thing to do here is just to scale this in a little bit, like that. And let's make that gap a little bit more pronounced. And maybe it even makes sense if we duplicate this curve, dupe edge, and we pull it out just a little bit. Maybe like that. And we use that as a trim object, and we actually build a gap in here. And that gap is then going to give us the space that we need in order to be able to blend surf these two things together. And this is like 99% of the modeling that I do. And so we're going to add a few shapes just to straighten out the isoparams on this, because we don't want them to get squirrely. And then I'm going to back this off a little bit because it's a little bit too aggressive. And then say, okay. Now this joins up beautifully. See that? And I'm not going to worry about the other side because I'm going to hack the thing in half and mirror it. So that is the first kind of step as far as getting these two shapes to blend together. Now we're going to do the same thing again, but we're going to stop kind of right here. And so how do we do that? Because this edge is continuous, right? So if I try to blend, it's going to try and blend all the way from one end to the other. So instead of worrying about that, I'm going to come under here, under the points, edges down here, under the edge tools, 3 menus deep, there's a tool called split and merge edge. And I have these in my pop-up, so that's probably where I'm going to get them, because going 3 menus deep makes me a little mental. But the split edge, what it does is it allows you to be able to click on an edge and then say, I would like you to break this edge right there. So now, if I look at this, this edge is now broken into 2 pieces. And that's super useful, because if I wanted to say, for instance, only blend from here to here, I can do that because I can split this edge into 2 pieces and then just go from there. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here and I'm going to snap to this one. Actually, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to mirror this, delete this, mirror it the correct way. There we go. And then that way I've got both sides match and all that kind of stuff. And I've got 2 copies of this, which I need to get rid of one. No. Let's do it correctly. Extract that surface first, mirror it. I could also sub-object select it if I didn't want to. If I was so lazy that I couldn't extract it, you can actually do that. Check this out. So this is the poly surface. If I Shift-Control-Click and then mirror, it actually pulls just that surface out to make the mirror, which is nice. So that's a nice little efficiency, and it's got the correct split in it. So now I can run blend. Blend surf. And I'm going to let it kind of be big, and then I'm going to go to the front view. And then let's drag the sliders. And this is kind of close. but the sliders aren't going to get me there. So I'm going to bring, and I'm going to just drag this one way up here, and I'm going to drag this one up to match. And that gets me pretty close. This, you know what? I'm going to say that's actually not bad. I'm going to let that go pretty close like that. And then what we'll do is we'll go in and mess with the points and figure out what we're going to do from there. So let's go ahead and run that. Turn the points on. And it is a poly surface, so we're going to have to explode it. Which means because it's a poly surface, I don't like the poly surface because it breaks it up into 3 points. So let's do the same thing we did before. And let's just do a blend curve. Let's make sure it's set correctly. Make sure it's at the ends here. Let's go to the front view, and it actually is pretty close. So that gives us the basis for this down here. And then we're going to do the same thing up here. I'm going to blend between these two edges. And I'm going to set from the edges here. I'm going to blend from here to here. And then I'm going to snap these ends to there. And there. And then I'm going to just wiggle the dials a little bit here so that they match. I'm going to hold shift and I'm going to drag these way back so they're very close. And I may need to build a little transition or something up here, so I'm not going to get too crazy about it. But that will give me now my 2-rail sweep. And this should give me just one surface. And even if it's crossing over, I don't care because I'm gonna fix it, right? Just like we did before. So in this case, if we rebuild it, it doesn't really help much. So I'm just gonna let it go. And we can even do tangency to match it to the edges and say, okay. And we're gonna do the same thing we did before. We're gonna grab this and turn the points on. And there's a lot of points here, but we're really actually pretty close to what we want. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to straighten out this garbage. So I'm going to drag select all this stuff, and I'm just going to smooth it. How cool is that tool, huh? And then we'll do the same thing here. And it's actually landing really, really close to what we want. This is okay up here. There's a little mess up here. Let's fix that. And you can see that it doesn't really hit exactly where we want, but that's okay because we can always cut back here and then surface to that. So I'm not super concerned about that. That's actually okay. We could point edit that out. And in fact, maybe what we want to do is rebuild this. And it had 54 points in that direction. Again, because we're going to blend into this, it doesn't really matter. So let's go ahead and let it go with the less points and see how much easier that is to work with now. So if we want to get this little cup, we can do that because that's easy. That's the whole reason that people get nuts over point counts. And if you watched any of Sky Greenewald's videos, which if you haven't, you should, he's got a YouTube channel called 32 Verts. There is gold on his channel. Make sure that you're looking at his stuff. But what he constantly harps on point count and keeping things simple and all that kind of stuff. This is why, because it's really easy to fix stuff if you keep the points low. And it's easy to manage the surfaces and it's easy to get what you want and things come out nice and smooth and all that kind of stuff. So this, let's clean up these guys right here because they're just a little messy. So I'm going to move this, grab this move UVN, smooth this out, and say okay. All right, so that gives us that. And then I'm not even going to bother trimming the edge of this. I'm going to just draw a curve, and I'm going to specify exactly where I want this blend to happen. And got to move it along a little bit. I've been blabbing a little bit more than I normally do. People have watched my videos before, like, no, this is exactly the same amount of blabbing you've done before. So you get what you pay for, folks. The webinars are free. All right, let's trim this. And I'm actually going to, let's see, I want to blend that into this thing all the way around. So I want to, let's see, I need to get this. That's fine. Let's do it this way. I'm going to keep this piece down here like that. And I'll figure out how to make that corner later. So let's trim this piece. And then let's, will this join? If it doesn't, then we need to fix it. It doesn't, so we'll fix it. All right, so we'll figure out how to deal with that later. I'm going to just get rid of it. Let's do this. Let's do a 2-rail sweep. Let's do a 2-rail sweep the correct way. There we go. And all I need is that little chunk down there, so I'm not really going to sweat it. And so I am going to draw this transition. So I'm going to start here, I'm going to snap to there, and then I'm going to start pulling this way. The center snap is very aggressive. There we go. So then I'm going to trim all this stuff off. That should join. And it does. So that gives me my gap to blend over, and actually this is going to work out okay here too. So now we can decide how we want all of this stuff to blend together. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to split the edges on this thing, because if I were to blend this, it's going to use this entire thing. And so what I really want to have happen is I want it to blend from there to there. I want it to blend from there to there. And then I want it to blend kind of from like here to here, kind of something like that. And then we'll figure out how to do the rest of it later. So let's go ahead and run this blend. And let's add a shape in this corner, because it looks like the isoprams are squirreling a little bit there, and I don't want them to do that. And because we did this with history, I have the option of editing this. And so I think I'm going to exercise that option, and I'm going to grab this and I'm going to make this just a hair thinner, like that, just so that transition sticks out a little bit more. And then I switched sides, but it doesn't really matter because it's symmetrical, so we can just flip this over and we'll join it up and see how we're doing. And in this case, we're not in bad shape. And not only are we not in bad shape, but we've got a nice 4-sided surface that we can work with down here. So we can just simply 2-rail sweep to get the bottom of this. That worked out convenient. And then up here, this is a little messy. And so to unmess this, I think what we're going to do is we'll go to the front view And we're just going to draw a line, and we'll just hack all this off. And then if we join it up, you can see that now we've got essentially a four-sided surface setup, right? We can do this. In fact, I could even do something crazy like this, where I use this and float that out in space like that. And you know, I probably wouldn't do that because that's a little funky. But what I could do is I can pull this curve, I can rebuild it because it's super messy to maybe like 10 points. Then I can go back here and say, okay, how's it look? And in this case, actually, because my original curve was a little sloppy, it actually works out okay. So I'm not gonna go nuts over that. So let's match this. And we're gonna match it from here to this edge. And we're gonna just match a tangent and say, okay. I'm gonna mirror this. And then we can actually now do our 2-rail sweep, and we'll get a little bit cleaner version of that. Okay, a little less jaggedy. And we could always rebuild the surface if we wanted it to be cleaner, but in this case, I'm not really gonna sweat it much. You know, I don't really care whether this is single span or not at this point, so. And let's just go ahead and do our final 2-rail sweeps here. And these I may rebuild because they're a little messy. And I might do tangent, tangent. And I might preserve the first cross section. Like that. Yeah, 5 is plenty. Say okay. Now, if it joins up, we're good. If not, we have to do a little matching, but in this case, it joined up fine. So let's Shift Control click, and I'm gonna mirror this around 0. And that way I don't have to pull it apart, and that gives us the basis for our thing, right? And so now to finish this up, all we need to do is draw a straight line through here, trim, cap, and that gives us a closed end. You guys are like, how's he going to wrap this up in 7 minutes? Hold my beer. And then we need to clean up this back here. So let's draw something vaguely in that neighborhood, something kind of like that. And let's overbuild it instead of just trimming. I'm going to drag the extrude dot off this curve, and I'm going to hold down Shift, which makes it go in both directions. And it looks like I'm missing my fillet on that side. So I'm going to Control Shift click, mirror, enter 0, and then pop it over there like that, and that should join back up. All right, and that gives us vaguely our back shape. So I'm going to use the, let's get fancy. There is we do need to build a cap off the bottom of this, so I'm going to cheat my drawing just a little bit because it's my drawing and I can do that. That's why you make your decisions in 3D instead of tracing a sketch. Now, if it had to fit batteries or something like that, maybe we'd get a little fussier, but I'm not really going to sweat this. Demo rules apply. Shift drag. All right, so now I've got this thing all closed up. I want to just check and make sure that all my normals are pointing in the right direction. And in this case, they're in the right direction there, but they're in the wrong direction here. So I'm going to flip, and then I can drag this entire thing and say, make solid, bloop. It makes a solid. And at this point, I can say, okay, is it too skinny, too fat? Does it need to be longer, taller? And I think maybe it needs to be just a hair. It's looking a little chonky, so I'm going to back it off just a little bit like that. I think that feels good. But look at the continuity between the handle and the body. If we go to rendered view and we throw a material on it, come on, red, somewhere in there. There we go. Boop. You can see that we've got gorgeous highlights on this thing, right? And you know, we're about an hour into this, and if we throw another 10 minutes at it, we'll probably be good to go. So let's do that if you've got the patience. So cutting the slot, super easy. Here, there, and now that I'm looking at this, it looks like this back one has a little bit of a curve in it, so I'm going to change degree to 3. I'm going to turn these points on. Join that back up. And because this is a solid, I can wire cut. So I'm going to cut right through this thing. Done. And just because of this concept model, I'm not going to sweat it too much. We might just Boolean a cylinder out of here for effect later, but I think for right now, I'm going to just forge ahead. In fact, I might even just fake something in there. And direction none. If I fake kind of something like this in there. Perfect. Ship it. That's believable enough for what we're doing here. So let's go back to wireframe and let's run for the finish line here. So this guy, I'm going to just draw this with something like that, and we're going to revolve it. And we're going to come kind of somewhere in there. Done. I'm not even going to bother fixing the intersection. Oh, maybe I will. I always say that I'm going to be sloppy with stuff, and then I see it, and I'm like, oh, we can't do that. That's what you got. That's what you get. All right. So let's do that, and I'm going to just Boolean subtract this using this, and I'm not going to delete the input. That way these two fit together. And it looks like I had some normals issues there. Let's fix that. If I cap it, it's a closed object. Now I can do that. The problem was my normals were facing backwards, so there we go. So there's that. And then if we want to put a blend on the end of this or a fillet on the end of this, I'm going to right click and use a variable radius blend. I'm going to select this entire edge, and I'm just going to put something tiny on here. Even tinier. And let's preview it to see whether it's going to go. It kind of chokes in this corner, so let's make it smaller. That'll work. As long as it's not crossing over itself. See how none of the isoparams are crossing? We'll call that good. And then we'll probably do the same thing here. Just to knock the edges of that off. And I'll probably do the same thing back here. That's a little not awesome, so let's make it a little smaller. That's better. I just want to break that edge so it's not sharp, sharp. All right, let's make the trigger and the cap. The cap we're going to make super easy. We're just going to grab, shift control click, drag, and extrude that extra piece out the bottom. Everybody's like, wait, what? If we wanted to do that a different way, we could drag this, tap Alt, and copy that surface. And then what we could do is we could actually blend, watch this. Let's drag this down a little bit. And then I'm going to hide this. This is a fun trick. So remember when we made a proxy surface up here to get our tangency? We can also use a proxy surface for blending. So we're actually not going to keep this. We're just using this as a tool, and we're going to blend between this edge and this edge, and that gives us the shape of our cap. And you know, it gets a little funky here and there. That's not, for this particular model, it's not really a huge deal. If I was going to do this for a client, I'd probably make it a little more less bad. So we'll do that, and then we can delete this, bring back this piece again, join it, and then if we wanted to put a little blend on the bottom of this to knock the edge off, we can go a little bigger. It's still hanging in there. And then for the gap, just a little cut line. I'm going to just pull this down just a little bit. And then to fill the gap in, I'm going to copy this surface. Let's see. Let's do this. Let's grab this curve that we already have. Let's use this as a curve to make a surface. Let's trim this and this. Then let's copy this. Let's scale it just a hair. And then we're going to extrude it straight up and down to make a little plug. Join this and this. Boolean this. Assign this to a color. And we've got our breakdowns. And now we can do sub-object assignment in Rhino. So we can specify what colors these things are. Get rid of these clingers. And we're pretty close. We're 11:03, so we're at an hour right now. And if we had some more time, I don't know how much patience you have as far as wanting to see the rest of this, but we can start adding the details of this thing, like making the frame for this thing to stand on. That's basically just a curve that we're going to pipe. And then the trigger is basically just going to be two extruded shapes. I'm going to have one extruded shape that's going to be a little fatter than the other, and we can go ahead and draw that out. Let's just draw the whole thing, and then we'll split it up later. So I'm going to just make a planar surface out of this. And then I'm going to draw another curve like that. We're going to split this guy. Sorry, I'm starting to speed up. I'm using my hotkeys again. And let's just grab this, shift drag on the extrude dot. Let's grab this, shift drag on the extrude dot, but not quite as much. We'll Boolean these two things together. We'll round it off a little bit. Let's round this one first and make it bigger. Always want to work from big to small when you're doing fillets. And then let's do these guys. And these are not going to be 0.1 because that's too big. Still too big. That'll go around the corner. So we'll call that good. And the whole thing's way too fat, so we're going to scale it down like that. Boolean that object from that object, and then I'm going to scale it down just a hair more. And what that does is that just gives us a little reveal for the trigger, so it looks like it's actually in there instead of just hanging out in space. And we'll make that color. Yeah, maybe that should be red. That works. And then let's do the little stand. And to do that, I'm going to start tracing these lines. Maybe I'll do it with a single line. That. Pull this out so that it's where it needs to be. Mirror it. That needs to be farther. There we go. And then this curve connects from one side to the other. And instead of going through all the hassle of trying to figure out how to draw that curve, I'm just going to change the degree from 1 to 5. That way I'll get 6 points. And then turn the points on. And then what I can do is I can pull these guys straight down. And then to get that little blend in that corner, I'm just going to use a blend curve. Flip the first one. That gives me that little corner right there. Blend will work on 3D curves, whereas fillet will not. Fillet has to be on planar curves. So that's the difference between blend and fillet. And I am going to trim this. And I'm going to mirror this. And I'll trim this. And then I'll join all that up. And then this has a little reveal that comes in there. So I'm going to blend between that and that. And that I am going to trim as well. Trim this off. Select curves and join, and then I'm going to just pipe this. And if all is well, it should give us a little pipe, and then we'll grab this thing and stick it kind of about where it needs to be, something like that. We can always tip it over a little farther in the rendering if we need to. Kind of like that. And then if we grab the entire thing, figure out where our ground plane is. That's all right. I'm not going to worry too much about it. We can always adjust it later. And then let's just make the hole for this to sit in. I'm going to just blow it right through the part. You know, depending on what the use of this model is, if it's just a rendering, you can lie, cheat, and steal. If it's got to be something that needs to be printed, then you'll do something different. You know, it just depends on It just depends on what you're gonna do. Put a super tiny fillet on that. It's too tiny. Let's do it right, shall we? There we go. Let's cap that. And then to get my hole, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to, let's see, let's extract, copy, yes, and then let's set the gumball to be aligned to the object, and then we can extrude straight out in space like that, and then we can cap this, and then we can Boolean subtract, and then we can scale this just a hair, and then we can grab this and tuck it back in, and then it actually looks like it's doing what it's supposed to do, right? Scale it just a little bit like that. And we'll knock this edge off. And we'll knock this edge off. Then it actually looks like it's doing what it's supposed to do. And then the only thing left we have to do is this little detail, which is this little blend detail. So it has this little highlight knife on here. And these are actually kind of fun to make because all you need to do is just draw where they are, like that. And I'm gonna copy paste. And I'm gonna edit this one so that it fades out like that. And then what we're gonna do is split this entire model. And I probably could have done this earlier, but I forgot about it, if I'm being honest. And we're gonna delete this thing. And then what we'll do is grab all of this, go to the top view, and we're going to taper it just a hair. And the taper axis is going to be the center. And the start distance is going to be out here. And we're just going to pull the back end just a hair, like that. And it kept everything lined up and good, right? Ooh, no, it didn't. Let's do that a different way. Let's do a cage edit, bounding box, world, and we're going to use, 4 points is fine. And so what we'll do is we'll grab these points back here, and we're going to scale them in just a little bit. And then we'll grab these points and scale them in just a little bit. And then we'll grab these points and scale them in just a little bit less. And we'll leave the fronts alone. And what that does is that gives us this nice little bend that we can then blend back into. And then we have to blend this stuff back together. And we can do that with either a one rail sweep or whatever we want to do. I'm speeding up a little bit because I don't want this to go for 2 hours, but basically this is the process, is just connect the dots again. I had somebody comment on one of my videos. It seems like he speeds up at the end. I'm like, yes, yes, I do, because I don't want to hold you hostage for 4 hours. And then we'll join all this up. Cap, whatever will cap, and then we'll figure out what doesn't cap. So it doesn't look like anything capped, so we'll just clean it up the old-fashioned way. Hide my curves so they're out of the way. Everybody's like, oh, I'm gonna puke. It's too fast. Sorry. And this is a great example of where that where splitting the surfaces helps a lot. So we're going to split this here, split it again here, and then it looks like we just caught the top of that. That's a little weird. Might have to redo that Boolean. All right, let's blend this and this. Four side, 1, 2, 3, 4. And we'll mirror this. And we'll one rail sweep this. Doesn't really matter at this point. We're just trying to connect the dots again. That's a little messy, but I'm not going to worry too much about it. And if I was going to do this right, what I would probably do is I would undo this trim and I would put it back together. But I'm trying to be respectful of the fact that we're starting to get a little late now. So I'm gonna just, you know, the way to do that would be to untrim this surface, reblend it in, redo the Boolean, and then that would clean that all up. But the effect that I wanted to show was this, which is essentially this little light knife. See how that fades out? Have our curves. And then essentially if we wanted to get into this further, we'd build some, we'd build the chord and all that kind of stuff. But I think I'm 18 minutes over and I apologize for that. But as it sits right now, I think this is probably where I'm going to stop. If you wanted to add the additional details on this, these little cutouts and things like that, I would just do those with pipes. I would just make a tube and I would just Boolean those notches out of there. Same for here, top and bottom. And then this detail here, I would probably, actually, let me show you how to do that real quick. I would draw this detail in. This actually is kind of something that I get questions about a lot. So I'm going to take this and let's trim this, trim this, trim that, join this all up. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to offset this. And I'm going to create a little shape like this, right? Then I'm going to wire cut this right through the model. And I'm not going to delete the objects. Oops, looks like I did delete the objects. And I want to keep all, don't delete the input. Looks like it deleted the input anyways. All right, fine, be that way. Let's split it. Then you just got this little slice. And we're just going to scale this in. that. And that gives you your cut line. If you needed to print this, what I would do is I'd actually go in and I'd connect all these little dots. So that's basically, I would just connect those surfaces. But if we were just doing a rendering or something like that, I might just leave it, call it a day. And that gives you a little detail. All right, so if we added a chord, I think we'd be done. And in this case, you know, if I had gone back and untrimmed this and cleaned this up, this would be a watertight part. In this case, it's not, but to clean it back up, it would just simply be a matter of removing this surface and redoing it, and then redoing the Boolean. I think we covered enough on that. Any questions so far? How many people have I bored to death here? Everybody still with me? Wow, you all stayed with me. Fantastic. Any other questions on any of this? Be happy to answer any questions. If not, I think I'm going to let you go, because I think that's what I've got for you today. Nothing? All right, fantastic. So we're going to do another model tomorrow for the Mac, and that is will be something different. Maybe not quite as ambitious as this one, but I think this one got us a lot of information in here. But tomorrow, 11 o'clock PST, we're going to do a Mac webinar, different build. Join if you'd like. All the modeling information translates, just the interface and the tools are a little bit different, or actually just the interface is different on the Mac side, but the modeling techniques and all that stuff are transferable side to side. So I think that's about it. That's all I got for you. My name is Kyle Houchins, tech and trainer from McNeil. Thanks for joining. Go make great stuff. Thanks.